Well, hey everybody, and welcome to the live stream. Here we go, clicking wrong buttons there. It's a great welcome to another live stream. This is the 17th live stream that I've actually done now, and it's great that so many people actually come and join the event live. It's actually really great. Even some people have sent me messages saying they can't make the live stream, so that's really great to know that it's become part of your routine. Couple of things before we get going. This is a live stream. It's a live Q&A session, really important because you, of course, the people watching and joining in are determining what the content of the live stream is. So that's really important to know. I don't decide the content, you absolutely decide the content. And format we're going to do, which I think is going to work, is I'm going to cover a couple of quick headlines as people join the group, etc. We then get into the Q&A, so keep posting questions. I've seen quite a few already coming in. And we will run for 60 minutes. As you know, I know your time is very precious. I appreciate you joining. So after 60 minutes, I will stop. If you are watching this later, a huge amount of people do watch this later. So the questions that you post are really valuable, I think, to people, because there are literally 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people watch the live stream afterwards. So they don't watch all of it, I guess. And really important, if you are watching this later, remember there's a bunch of questions, some of which you may know the answer to. So remember, you can skip forward. If you're on mobile, there's a little 30-second bit where you can skip forward to questions. Of course, you can use the scroller. Really important, because some people said to me, oh, well, I don't watch it live because there's too many questions I knew the answer to. So bear in mind, you can, of course, skip forward. If you're brand new here, let me introduce myself very quickly and then we'll get stuck in. I'm Gary Bembridge. The channel is Tips for Travelers. The goal of the channel is to try and help people find, plan, and have incredible cruise vacations. The plan and the goal of the channel is to try and make all of that so much easier. So that's all the preamble going. Let's get stuck quickly into 4 quick headlines that I thought I would talk about, and then we'll get into all of the many, many questions coming in. And I'll put my glasses on so I can eventually read them again. So a couple of headlines I want to touch on. I've got a little cheat sheet here. It doesn't show it there. Sort of since my last update, I put up a video every Thursday, every Sunday. A couple of headlines came in since then, which I thought I'd just quickly touch on in a couple of sentences. Of course, one of the big news, particularly for people in the UK, but also in the US especially, is Cunard. They've cancelled now all their advertised cruises right through to November. It differs a little bit by ship. And they have said on the Queen Elizabeth, they will join P&O Cruises and Princess Cruises have already confirmed running domestic cruises. So a lot of ships talking about coming on stream. And that's going to be really interesting. I've been doing a couple of polls on my Facebook group, on YouTube and stuff, about how many people in the UK are looking to book those. And it's not as many people as I thought it would be, but maybe once the details come out, that'll change. I'll talk more about that perhaps later. Second big thing is Crystal Cruises. You may have seen are going to be sailing out of the Bahamas and Bimini from about July time. And the idea, I guess, is they're going to try and tap into some people from the US, or people from the UK can join. Of course, you have to have your vaccination, both of those, at least 14 days before, and there's a whole series of PCR tests and things that you have to do before that. So that's certainly a cruise line opening up closer to the US. Of course, we hope that's going to be a little bit more successful than Sea Dream's attempt. If you are in the US, river cruising has started this weekend in the US along the Mississippi. 2 cruise lines are starting up. One started opening today, one starting up on Monday. So it's American Cruise Line, I think they're called, an American Steamboat Company. So certainly if you are desperate to go cruising in the US, you do have that option. And of course, many of you will have seen MSC Lyrica had that fire in Corfu in the lifeboat, which looked pretty horrendous on the pictures. But the good news is 51 crew, all fine, and not huge amounts of damage. So there we go. That's a little bit of scene setting. And let's dive into the questions. As I said before, if you have a question, leave those in the chat piece. I'll try and answer as many of those as I possibly can. I also do keep an eye, I think I mentioned before, on my iPad, because for some reason, not all the questions show up there, and some of them more of them show up on the iPad, which shows all of the questions. So let us get stuck into the questions. One of the questions that came up was from the JM129. Good to see you again. Who joins us the live stream regularly, saying on Thursday, President Biden said that at best there could be small group barbecues by July the 4th, not large groups. Is there any reason to project cruises in the US earlier than the fall? It's very interesting. I saw that press conference. Well, I didn't see it actually. I read the press conference what he said with the goals of terms of getting, of course, vaccination. I think that goal is to have everybody being offered one by about May, with the idea that by Independence Day, there'll be some easy opening. The only thing I can say, which was very interesting, there was a report, interview, I guess, probably better than a report, which Cruise Critic ran with Clear, talking about their suspected or expected timings for opening in the US. And there definitely were, I think, as you were suggesting there, they seem to be of the view that this is going to be much later than many people thought. And what they were saying is, of course, they're still waiting the CDC to give those technical specifications. What they were saying is the CDC is very focused on the vaccine program, not very focused on travel at all. Many of you would have seen, I think I covered it in this week's video, where the new head of the CDC, which I apologize, I've forgotten her name, basically said, we are actively discouraging people from traveling, because every time we see people traveling, we're seeing a flare-up in cases. And I've seen lots of reports in the paper today about spring break and in Miami, and all the concerns around crowds gathering. So I guess the answer, I don't know the answer, but certainly Cruise Critic were suggesting they see this running much longer, certainly way into the sort of June, July timing. And also what they were saying, though, which is interesting, is they also think that there will be an opportunity to discuss the protocols, because, of course, the CDC hasn't issued new protocols around what's going to happen with as vaccines for people who are more vaccinated. Will that change the protocols? Will social distancing change, or mask wearing change? All those kind of rules, will they change? So they were suggesting that the protocols may be slightly different to what we're seeing. Of course, what we're waiting for, and we'll get a really good sense of that pretty soon, is what some of the thinking is, certainly in the UK, because the UK cruises, domestic cruises, are due to go on sale before the end of the month. I think Pinot ran some stuff on Twitter saying it could be as early as next week. They start putting those on sale. So at that time, I guess we will get a good sense about what some of those protocols are going to be. And certainly by April the 12th, we'll have a really good sense of what those protocols will be when the Global Task Force reports back. So what I'm hearing in the US is conservative. Now, what the other people asked a really good question, which I think links to that, which I can't bring up. I'll find it in a second. But someone asked the question around when do I think that those domestic UK cruises are going to be starting up? And we do have quite a strong indication about that. It's not going to be soon. So we heard Pinot said it's going to take many weeks, but actually Princess said it's going to take up to 12 weeks. So if you take 12 weeks from now, so that's basically 3 months away now, sort of assuming they get the okay, it's February, March, April, May, it's into June and July timing. So it's interesting because you also got even Crystal when they started in Bahamas, July. So July is feeling more like the earliest, even those countries that have got the green light. And it's very interesting as well, because there was a river cruise conference held again this week with the river, I think it's called the European River Cruise Group Association, I can't remember the exact name, and they had these regular calls where they talk about timing, and they were saying that they don't really expect, what they're expecting is they're hoping in early summer, beginning of early summer, they will be able to run some domestic river cruises for European guests only. What they're saying is they're not expecting, because of the state of the virus in Europe, which is sort of heading in some countries, increasing into a third wave, vaccine rollouts taking longer. So they're saying that they're going to expect, some borders, let's say between Germany and some other countries are closed. So they might expect there will be some domestic river cruising starting up. They're not expecting until right into August, September, and even later time that, say, US guests are going to be traveling in any numbers to river cruising. So it does feel, if you're looking at sort of a grouping of timings, it's feeling more and more like that sort of timing. So that's certainly, I'm expecting certainly when those cruises, the Pinot Princess, go on sale, I'm sort of thinking it's probably going to be July onwards kind of timing. It's great to see Hetty and Paul and Carol in, which is really, really great. The question, hypnotherapy for you, they were asking about, when do we think they'll begin? I think that's probably sort of much more realistic. Good to know. Just some feedback here. Nicholas saying, thanks for your tips. I'm currently planning my first ever cruise in September 2022 on Norwegian Cruise. I'm going solo, and we've spoken about solo cruising quite a few times here. So it's good to hear that some of those are definitely helping. So Michelle's had her second dose. It's really interesting when you look at the whole jargon. One of the things I sort of look at when I'm doing some of these things, I have a very big US audience, and then of course I have a big UK audience, Australian audience. And it's interesting on jargon because in the UK they're called jabs, and definitely in the US they're called shots. So Michelle's had her second shot. Dee, do you think cruising the Mediterranean will start soon? Again, when we're talking about timing, it's really interesting because in fact cruising in the Mediterranean has started and it's back sailing again. Of course, it started last year. MSC Grandiosa is sailing currently 7-night cruises, and we're seeing some of the other cruise lines going to start up again. Costa is due to start up again in March during the course of this month. However, a lot of them have dialed back a lot what they're doing. There is some cruising going on still in the Canary Islands with some German lines. What's going to be very interesting to watch, though, is with Italy, cases rising quite significantly. They're going into some further lockdown again, particularly in Rome and Milan. It'll be interesting to see whether the Italian cruises get pulled back again. So cruising is starting, but I guess what you want to know is it going to be open more widely? And that is, there's no indications on timing at all. One of the things I'm watching very carefully, because I do actually have a couple of Mediterranean cruises which were booked a while ago in June and July and so on. And what I'm watching, particularly for an indication, is where those ships are, because a lot of those ships are still in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean. The other thing I'm watching for, by the way, on timing is crew movements, because that's always a good indication of when things are happening. So there hasn't been a lot of reporting of crew being brought back yet. I've seen some posts today on Crew Center, and I've referred to that a couple of times, crewcenter.com, which is a great place for getting a sense of what's happening with crew. And there's been a whole lot of crew transfers with Princess currently happening in Singapore, and they're heading off to Manila. So I don't know whether that's a sign of starting to bring back crew for those UK cruises or something more broadly. But at the moment, it's really, really uncertain. The cruise lines have pushed back those that are very strong, like MSC, Costa. They have 1 or 2 ships coming on board, and they sort of at the moment saying May, June timing, but still kind of really waiting on that. Richard saying your latest video was very informative, which is great. The video this week on the Thursday, I bring out a video which is mostly updates and sort of commentary on things that are happening. Then Sunday video tends to be a slightly more general cruising topic. The good news is people are definitely starting to watch more general cruise content, more general cruise content. Let's talk a little bit about, this is interesting because hypnotherapy, saying your survey suggests today that there are as many people who don't want to do UK cruises as do. Do you think the supply and demand will keep the price down? What will UK protocols be? It's very interesting. There's been lots of discussion amongst cruise writers, obviously bloggers, etc., around the scale of demand, because of course we all want to go cruising as many as possible. I'm sort of like thinking, shall I do P&O, shall I do Princess and Cunard and all that kind of stuff? But I think, I was talking to some travel agent friends of mine, in fact, travel agent I work with as well, and what they were saying is they're absolutely seeing a lot of people interested, but a lot of people saying for this summer and this year, there is a lot of reluctance to still travel, particularly outside of the borders, and also in terms of cruises more generally. One reason being, I think the point that you raise is around protocols. As you've probably seen, and you might have seen if you look at some of the comments under that surveys, is that some of those protocols are a real block for many people, particularly the masks rule. A lot of people say, look, if I'm going to spend money to go on a cruise, I don't want to spend it when I've got to wear a mask. I don't want to wear it if I can't, meet people, sit with people, and all those kind of things. I'd actually much rather just hold back my money and wait until I can. So I think a lot of that demand, coming to your question, will hinge around those protocols. Now, in the UK, for those people in the UK will know this, but for people who are out of the UK, is in the UK, the plan under the government roadmap is that in the middle of June, I can't remember if it's the 16th or 15th, the idea being that because of the nature of vaccination rollout, the idea is that pretty much all restrictions they hope to lift. Now, we haven't seen the detail of that, but the suggestion is things like social distancing will be lifting. So, for example, the theatres have all reopening dates for their big shows, and they're all taking after June, July time, depending on the individual show, they are now booking full theaters. So we don't know whether that will also apply to mask wearing and things like that. So certainly that's the expectation, is will that be cascaded into cruising? So we'll get a really good sense soon. But if they follow what the plan is on land, it suggests that the restrictions on, or the type of cruising experience could be closer to normal. So that's going to be a key one to watch. We don't really know. Now, your question on supply and demand, until, of course, they open the cruises, we don't know. And I think your point is a really good one on pricing. Now, we're going to get a good sense, as I mentioned, maybe as early as next week, what the cruise is going to be and the pricing. Now, I'm really interested to see how they're going to launch them next week, because at the moment, this approval for cruising is only in England. So Scotland still hasn't announced whether they would accept cruising. Northern Ireland hasn't, and Wales hasn't. So this is only applying to England. So it'll be interesting to see, maybe the early cruises are going to be cruises to nowhere or cruises to England. So there's also that whole issue still to go around, what they're going to be. So it's going to be really interesting, as first of all, the nature of the cruises, how long they're going to be, and pricing. But I agree with your point. There does appear to be, there's going to be a whole lot of capacity. So it's going to be very interesting to see what pricing is going to be. I wouldn't be surprised at all if what you're suggesting is prices are pretty sharply priced. Certainly when cruises came on board, with MSC started, when Costa started, all those other cruise lines started, the prices were pretty attractive. So even the Crystal cruises, which they're launching, Crystal's pretty expensive. They're talking about cruises around about $2,000 per person, which for Crystal is pretty low for a 7-night cruise, with only a 25% premium for a solo travel. So I think you're right. The prices will be pretty tight. Mark, I can answer this question. Do you think passengers for the new UK cruises will require full passport, or will photo ID suffice? You absolutely, it's going to have to be a passport. I checked on that. If you actually look on some of the cruise lines sites, so P&O, for example, is one example where they have actually a Q&A, and what they actually say on there very clearly is you will need a passport. And that could be to do with the fact, I don't know, it's to do with going out of territorial waters, or it's just seen as a more robust, but absolutely, yes, passports are going to be absolutely required. Paul's asking a question around cruising in the transatlantic. So transatlantic is a really good point, because up until November, transatlantics have a real issue, because no ship can go into the US or go into US ports if it's been sailing for longer than 7 days. And of course, most transatlantics are longer than that. Now, the Queen Mary 2 does their transatlantic in 7 days. Cunard have cancelled their Queen Mary 2 right through to November, but they specifically called out the uncertainty around basically borders opening and people moving, certainly between countries, but certainly between Europe and the United States. So I think that is really, really uncertain. And it's going to be very interesting, because we will again get a clue very, very soon, because if those ships are that normally are in the Mediterranean are going to be coming to Mediterranean, they will be coming in the next month or so, because that's when they normally shift. So at the moment, they can't embark any passengers anyway, because they're not allowed to. But it's going to be really interesting to get a sense of those transatlantics. I've had a lot of people contacting me. They've got transatlantics booked when ships go the other way in that sort of October, November time. And my feeling is, if ships are able to get over here by November, the transatlantic rules in the US should have lifted. So that should, that should definitely be something. Carl's asking a question around Viking. When do they have special offers on for single supplements? Can you please answer my question? Kind regards, Carl. So I'm having a slug of my tea. Aha, right. Carl, it is a real challenge finding solo traveler deals on Viking. Now, I have been looking for a long time in terms of Viking and solo traveler deals. It's very unusual, particularly on their ocean product. Their ocean product sells incredibly well. They do have another ship, I think it's their 7th ship coming on stream as soon as cruising can start up again. But you'll almost never find single solo travel cruises. I think I've seen some on river cruising. So there is a very high premium for solo travelers. The only suggestion that I have is sign up for the email newsletters, because if they do any promotions, they're there. Or certainly, what I would also do is what I do, like with our travel agent, is like any sort of deal hints coming, then let me know. But definitely, Viking is really going to be a really big travel challenge. Is the word. I've seen I haven't succumbed to some techniques. I'm not sure what we say. I see people being very kind about me not being hysterical. I try not to be hysterical. Poor Carol's saying the same thing about July. Falls on a birthday and retirement. Of course, yes, Carol's retiring from the NHS, if I think I'm correct. Elaine, let me talk about Greece. Cruising in Greece. Are they cruising there? Now, it's interesting because Greece has always, in fact, even last year, opened to cruising. Of course, as we know, the quantum of this, Odyssey of the Seas, in that deal they've done between Greece, Israel, and Cyprus, where they've signed a deal where vaccinated people can travel between those three countries very freely. The Odyssey of the Sea, which is going to sail out of Israel, is going to be calling on Greece. But you have to be vaccinated before you can go on that, and you have to be an Israeli citizen. So certainly Greece is opened. Now, the one I always look at for Greece, and the second thing I want to say is when last year the original cruises by MSC, etc., opened, they did actually include some cruises with Greece and Malta, which would allow ships in at that time. And then with the sort of second wave, that stopped. None of them have started coming back to Greece. However, the thing I always look at is Celestial Cruises is a cruise line which is based in Greece, and I think they're entirely Greek owned. And I'm really looking forward to going on. I'm due to go on them in October, and they have just pushed back the start of cruising. So they're home based in Athens, in Piraeus, which is the port near Athens. They've pushed back starting until sort of towards the end of May. So I think they're expecting that they're going to see cruising starting up, certainly for people that are able to travel. Now, Greece is pushing extremely hard for these for the EU to open to travel. But what they've also pushing really hard and doing these bilateral deals with is to allow people into Greece, if they've had both doses of the vaccine, to come into Greece without any form of quarantining and, in fact, without kind of other restrictions. So they've got those deals already with Cyprus and with Israel, but they are pushing for a deal at the moment with the UK. The UK, there's a lot of people go to Greece in the summer, so they're trying to negotiate that deal, and I suspect we'll see something like that. So it's possible that UK people, UK residents, will be able to travel to Greece, and then by definition, if the Foreign Office lifts the restrictions on international cruises, then they would be able to go on those Celestial Cruises, because travel becomes legal again after the middle of May. It's currently illegal. One of the things that brings me another point, sorry, it's a slight tangent from your question, but what's very interesting is, as you know, the UK is allowing these cruises, England is allowing these cruises at the moment, but they are falling at the moment under domestic travel, and there's been very strong suggestions that the Foreign Office will not be lifting its no cruise advice on international cruising. It doesn't apply to real cruising, so it's going to be very interesting, because that's going to be a major determinant on when UK people can actually travel more broadly on cruising. So in terms of Greece, I hope that answers your question. Celestial Cruises is the one to watch, because they only go to Greek islands, and they are due to open from May. And again, it depends on those restrictions. If other people going into Greece, if you don't have a vaccine, there's PCR testing, and there's actually some quarantining, which is why it doesn't really quite worked. So here's a non-opening question. So it's great to answer a non sort of opening question, non-cruise when will cruise start. So Kelly's asking, do you know to whom the auto gratuities are distributed? I was told to many crew members, not just our servers and cabin attendants. Kelly, it's a great question. Gratuities is one of the, certainly other than when is cruising going to start, when I look at my channel and I look at the comments, gratuities is such a big hot topic. People who are really anti them and pro them and etc. So it's a great question to ask. And the answer to the question is, what normally happens with auto gratuities is, and there's lots of arguments and things about how much gets through to the crew, which I won't go into, but they are spread to quite a broad cross-section of the crew in varying sort of percentages and amounts. So you're absolutely right. The auto gratuity becomes almost like a big pot, which supplements a lot of people across the ship's wages. So you're right, it will cascade right into the kitchen and so on and so forth, which is also, I guess, why there was a lot of encouragement to move away from handing gratuities, which obviously went to a more narrow pool of people, into spreading it more broadly. And then, of course, you get the whole debate coming of, are we actually just subsidizing salaries for everybody? So one of the things that's been very interesting, which I don't know the answer to, but I will try and find out the answer to, is many, if not all, of the deals that I've seen for cruising, both this year and into next year, are deals which include and bundle in a lot of things. So they often bundle in gratuities, drinks packages, Wi-Fi. So certainly if you're booking a cruise at the moment for this year, if you're confident enough that it's going to happen, or into next year, really look for those deals and ask your agent or those deals. But anyway, what we don't know, which is really interesting, is will it just basically mean that the crew are going to take the hit? So those auto gratuities, effectively, which we're getting for free or being prepaid, will just, the crew are actually going to be the ones paying for this. And I don't know that, and I really want to find out that, and we'll find out. So hopefully that answers your question. It does cascade, really, quite deeply. Cohen van der Broek, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, Cohen. Are 7+ night cruises still an issue when vaccinated? So certainly in the currently under the framework for conditional sailing, the 7+ night cruises, which only apply to cruises in and out of the US, even with vaccination, they are still not allowed. Now, the big question is, will the CDC review some of the terms and conditions of their framework for conditional sailing to take into account the role of vaccines? That we don't know. So at the moment, the answer to the question is yes, but vaccines weren't really taken into account. So one of the things that we're really waiting for is, what is the CDC's approach to travel? Now, you may have heard there was a big rumpus in the US where there were some suggestions the CDC were going to be talking about things like testing before domestic flights, which was a big pushback on. There have been lots of pressure for them to issue more travel guidance for vaccinated people, which they've said they will not do. They've explicitly said they will not do. So lots to wait for. No, but certainly at the moment, the assumption would be absolutely yes, until they specifically change that. Now, what we don't know is, outside of the US, of course, they don't have that 7+ day rule at all. It doesn't exist at all. So we don't know, of course, what protocols or how protocols will change with vaccinations. Certainly in the UK, those domestic cruises that are starting up, they're all going to be less than seven nights. So they said they're going to be short, little taster cruises, a couple of nights, up to 7 nights. So they're definitely going to be there. Akil saying no more booking options for Norwegian Cruise Line in June in their website, so thinking they will cancel June as well. So that's good to know. I haven't had a look at that specifically, but I'm trying to remember when they actually cancelled through to. They might have already cancelled through to there. One of the things that I do, because it gets really confusing, what I've done on my website is, if you go to my website, so tipsfortravelers.com, which is spelled with 2 L's, the UK way. And I have a little thing at the top of the page always, which is called When Will Cruise Lines Resume Sailing? And what I do is, every time an update comes from any cruise line, I update that, but I rank it by month. So I saw lots of other people that did, like Cruise Critic and other people, they rank it alphabetically by cruise line. But actually, I thought what would be more interesting, certainly for me, is looking at it by month. So if you're ever unsure what the most recent thing of cancellations are, have a look on there. Because what I also do on there is, because what we're seeing now is increasingly it's by ship. So for example, I just updated yesterday with Silver Sea, for each of their ships, they have a different date. And that's definitely what we're going to be seeing increasingly, is not, as you say, Norwegian might have taken everything off for, off sale, which normally, you're right, means they're about to cancel. But what's really important is, they've also said every ship will not come back at the same time. We're going to bring back slowly but steady ships. And Norwegian have actually specifically said, and I think both Norwegian and Royal have said, it's likely to be a ship a week, possibly. So, and they've got, in Norwegian, they've got 18 ships across their fleet. So you're talking, quite a long time. So bear in mind also that when you look at that blanket cancellation, you go, oh, they're going to start sailing in July or June or whatever. You don't know if that's really going to happen for your specific ship. So it's really important to watch out. But one of the things I've noticed is increasingly the cruise lines, when they announcing cancellations, are announcing it by region and increasingly by port or by ship. So if you look at the most recent Holland America announcement, they actually announced it by some specific ports. They said out of Port Canaveral, out of Los Angeles, out of our European embarkation ports, which is basically Barcelona, Cicciavecchia, and Venice, largely, a little bit out of Athens. So that's really, really important. But I think bearing in mind, we haven't seen, they don't have the technical guidelines from the CDC. They can't start the test cruises. They've got to, once they get the okay for the test cruises, that'll take a while to get done. Then they've got to wait 60 days. So the timing is going to be an absolute while. Now, some question about testing positive and would you be denied boarding? Because I do want to touch on that. I'll see if I can find the original question, and then I'll come back to that. I'll answer KB's question, and then I'll come back because I've seen some things which I'll come back to, and I'll come back to the thing about what happens if you get tested positive, because there is some more insight in that. So Gary, that's me. KB says, I see a lot of so-called round the UK cruises include ports in France, Ireland, and Guernsey. With restrictions in place for those countries, will this be the case? It's a really good point, because around the UK cruise normally includes, as you say, all those calls of different countries. Now, what's very important is that's also why they cancelled all their round UK cruises. So, Princess basically brings ships to the UK, and during the summer they sail round UK, which calls on Ireland. A lot of them, as you say, might go to Guernsey or France or whatever. Guernsey has said absolutely no cruise ships in 2021 anyway. But you're right, they've cancelled those around the UK. And what's the important distinction now is they are literally going to be domestic cruises. So at the moment, they're only going to be England unless the other countries open. So you're only going to be able to call it English ports. Now, I guess they're hoping they'll eventually be able to call it a little bit further afield. But you're right, those round UK cruises cannot happen until those countries open to cruising. But the ones that are coming will not be around the UK. So lots of people are like, why is my around the UK being cancelled? Because they're going to sail around the UK. It's because they're not actually not around the UK. So I'll also, again, another non-opening question. I'm going to scroll back and see if I can find that question on the what happened, so I can answer the specific one. So I'm looking at my thing there. What is your overall opinion of Regent 7C as it compares to other luxury liners? Now, Regent is a fantastic cruise line, but I do have to declare that I have only toured Regent ships. I haven't cruised on Regent ships, where I've cruised on Seabourn and Crystal and all those others. So I can only go by what I've seen, what I've read, obviously, and what other people have said. So Regent is definitely right up there with things like Crystal. I see Regent and Crystal being probably even closer, just in terms of the type of passengers they get on board, the type of experience they have on board, and the kind of the attention to detail. Now, Regent actually tend to be a little bit more pricey in most cases. That's because they actually include excursions. They have more of like a river cruise approach, where they include a certain amount of excursions in each of the ports. But certainly I would say, if you like Crystal, Regent is going to be a really, really kind of brilliant and good match. So definitely it's, from what I saw on the ships, beautiful, beautiful, absolutely magnificent, really magnificent ships indeed. So someone's asking about Alaska, just scrolling back. Alaska sort of came on late, better late than never, as I said. I was really glad that you joined us. And of course, if you are later, you can always go back and watch it. I do leave it up on the channel. You can always go back and look at what you've missed if you're that desperate to find out what we discussed. Have you discussed Alaska cruises yet? Will there be any cruises this year? Has there been any movement on the port laws? Thanks, Tom. So in terms of Alaska, we haven't discussed Alaska. I'll touch very briefly on where we are in Alaska. There's some developments, but there's basically no developments at all. So let me just say where we are. As you know, it all hinges around Canada saying no cruise ships until February 2022. So all those, because of the Passenger Vessel Services Act, basically you can't run Canadian cruises. So there are Canadian cruises running on those smaller ships, which are American-owned, American ships, less than 250 passengers. They're able to sail in and out of U.S. ports without anywhere else. So Uncruise, I guess American Cruise Line, there's a whole bunch of them will be running cruises in Alaska and starting up when the season starts. And of course, there'll be whatever the restrictions are with moving in and out of Alaska. There has been an appeal made by the Alaskan senators through the Transport Committee, I can't remember its full name, which they've made some representations via the Canadian ambassador to see if they will allow things like technical stops. The Canadians have pretty much indicated they're not interested in that. There's no gain for them, I guess. And then there has also been some attempts to raise a specific bill around getting some exemptions from the Passenger Vessels Services Act. However, someone had pointed out to me, and I need to go and double check this, that a lot of people get confused between the Jones Act and the passengers, the PSPA. I always get the wrong way, PVSA. Anyway, Jones Act is the one that covers maritime movements, goods movements. There have been some exceptions over time when goods have needed to move around for disaster relief. Never been any exceptions to the one that covers cruise ships. But there was some discussion, which I need to verify, that someone said is there have been some changes also, those where the only exceptions can be based on national security. So you can only change that rule on national security. So basically, it's not looking very promising now. I have had some other people contact me recently saying that actually some of their Alaska cruises, which they had been taken off sale, but were those more traditional Alaska cruises, they have just been cancelled. So again, I need to verify that. So certainly, personally, I think it's extremely unlikely that cruises will happen. The reason for that is Alaska is one issue, but the bigger issue to sort of be resolved is there are no ships and no date for ships to sail in the United States. So until the CDC allows ships to sail, the Alaska discussion is almost moot. And with the timing that's going, it's getting extremely late for even Alaska season. So that's definitely that's definitely going to be a massive big challenge. So it's very nice comments about the channel. So it's great, absolutely great to hear. So let's talk about lots of people asking about Asian and Australian cruises. So in terms of Asian cruises, there are of course Asian cruises running at the moment out of Taiwan, Singapore, and Japan. China cruises will start sailing next month to Royal Caribbean. Was it this month? Anyway, imminently, within weeks, to Royal Caribbean ships. Now, each of those, of course, are only for Singapore residents, only for Taiwanese, only for Chinese, only for Japanese. So if we talk about more broadly speaking, there have been no confirmed opening dates at all. So none of the cruise lines have been speaking about it. And when they cancel, they're doing blanket canceling and making no reference, interestingly, to any of those Asian cruises. Now, a lot of those Asian cruises were often, obviously, ships being home ported there or parts of a bigger tour. So there's been very little news on Asian cruises. In terms of Australian cruises, of course, again, there are some extra Australian cruises, but they are very small, on very small, 40, 50 size passenger kind of ships, very local. So at the moment, no cruise ships can go into Australia, bigger cruise ships, until June. And again, I think it's June the 17th, but or it's June the 15th, one of the two dates there. So all cruise ships are banned. So of course, all cruise has been cancelled. They have said, though, that they are working, the government said that they are working with Clear to look at whether there could be domestic cruises happening. Although, of course, what a lot of Australians do point out is that's now winter. So actually, it's not normally a particularly big season. So I think a lot of them are looking for later. Of course, we need to bear in mind that the Australian borders are well closed. So for non-Australians, it's a non-starter for a start. The Australian vaccine program is due to, they're hoping to have that done by October, which is the earliest date that Qantas are flying. So Qantas have said they will start flying if everything goes to plan in October. But again, no understanding around what that's likely to be, if people are going to be able to fly in to join Australian cruises. With Australian, they basically go for a no COVID scenario, so it's hard to see that opening, or certainly if they're going to open, it's going to be pretty complex, I would have thought. And I think obviously for Australians only is going to be the way it's going to be for quite a while. And it's really interesting because we have very good friends in Australia. Quite often at Christmas we go to Australia, and we've kind of actually, this coming Christmas, we've decided not to even put that on. We're just going to kind of ignore Australia until it's really clear how that all opens. It doesn't help you with the cruising question. That's a bit of anecdotes about my personal life. Royal, good question. I did say many, but I think it's a good point. So I'm going to point out, of course, I need to be careful. I mustn't say all, many. So Royal, you're right. Royal aren't bundling the bookings in. So they booked 2022 yesterday. Fantastic. Hopefully going somewhere wonderful at the moment. Anyway, on cruises, wonderful. So they're not bundling. That's a good point. So they definitely aren't bundling those in. One of the things that Royal Caribbean probably have been doing more of is, their lift and shift and their cruise with guarantee and the flexibility. They've been pretty good at some of the flexibility. Trutella asked me a question. Will you test Ritz-Carlton's Evrima? And I always, if I can learn how to pronounce it, I will, which will debut in July. I don't currently have any plans on the Ritz-Carlton Evrima. I would definitely like to try it. And the reason I don't currently have it is because theoretically, when we started in 2020, I had a full year of cruising. I shoved them all into 2021. We know how that's going. So theoretically, I have a cruise in June, July, August, September, October, November. So theoretically, I don't have any open time to really try it. Number one. So until they get cancelled, I'm not rescheduling. And secondly, I haven't really looked at it closely yet in terms of pricing and where it's going and stuff. But ultimately, I would really like to give it a go. It does look an amazing ship. So at some point in time, but what I would probably do before that is try the main Region 7C product, because as we heard the earlier question, it's not one I've covered, and until you've really cruised the ship, you can't really cover it. And I would really like to cover that because I get asked quite a lot on that. So it is kind of on the list. I do actually have it on the list. I have a list of destinations, a list of cruise lines that I want to go on that I haven't been on. Disney's another great example, which again I was supposed to go on last year, but never happened. So that is actually one that's on the list specifically as both a cruise line and as a ship. Let's have a look. So, Paul Carroll got some pricing up, which is great. Odyssey of the Seas have 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 7 itineraries, all balcony cabins. That's a really important point. Is Odyssey of the Sea are not selling ocean view or inside cabins, and that is also true, by the way, when other cruises started up in Europe. So when Mein Schiff started sailing, when MSC and those other cruise lines started, they did not sell ocean view and inside. Now, what was being used at one point of time, sitting in lab, is some of that was also being used for crew capacity, but also they had lower capacity on these ships, and they weren't selling those. So interesting point, balcony, and then you're looking at $405 up to £290. So it's pretty per night. It's it's pretty attractive pricing. So thanks for posting that, Paul and Carol. So this is interesting because Royal Caribbean have confirmed from board, which is good to know. Certainly publicly, Royal Caribbean have been they have been non-committal, is the word I'm looking for, about will they follow the domestic cruising approach. There was an interview with the MD, whose name I massacred in my recent video for the UK, so apologize to him, which basically said, if that's their only option, they would definitely be open for it. However, they had a couple of issues. Number one of their ships, which I think is due to be in the UK, which I think is Anthem, I stand corrected on that, it's basically too big to go into most of the ports that you would have to call on in the UK. So they'd end up having to do a lot of cruises to nowhere. And of course, in the UK, you're not guaranteeing the beautiful Caribbean weather. So the ships are probably less ideal for that. However, are they likely to put something on? There are ships, Royal Caribbean ships here around the UK already laid up. So it's good to see that they are likely to do it. It would be strange for them not to do it, I think. Again, I think because it means you can get your ship recrewed up, you can get it running again, you can get everything in place, you can get crew back, you can get some revenue coming in, even if you're not making money. And then as things open, you can kind of crank it up and go further afield. So that's good to know. And but certainly publicly they haven't confirmed that they're going to do, but I think everyone's kind of expecting that. Raul asking any updates on Antarctica cruises. Now that was very interesting because, again, I have a vested interest. I'm due to go on my cancelled Antarctica cruise in November, from November last year, moved in. Now there was actually an expedition group, an expedition collective group, whatever you want to call it. They did have a call recently, a discussion recently about expedition cruising, and they are feeling pretty bullish about the season. They're also being relatively bullish, certainly Ponant, which is part of that, we're being relatively bullish about the feeling that they might be able to open the Arctic season, which has a long way to go to that opening, but they think they may be able to open the Arctic season. But certainly Antarctica, they're much more optimistic about, obviously, because they're seeing by that stage in the vaccination process will be much further through. Of course, South America would have to be quite far along that process to open. But I'm guessing, and it'd be interesting to see, because they were implying certain changes, is they are going to have to be pretty locked and sure that they have created a pretty secure bubble, because once they leave Ushuaia and head over into Antarctica, if anything goes wrong, it's a long way away and very remote. So one of the things I did see one of the expedition cruise lines talk about, was one of the smaller ones, and I think I might have mentioned this before, is they're talking about getting people over, because they use charter flights anyway, so they're getting people into, I think it was Chile, which is where when I did my last one, we went to Chile, and then we flew from Chile to Ushuaia. Some fly into Buenos Aires, but a lot of people fly into Chile for some reason, I guess, connections. But they were talking about they're going to get people in ahead of the cruise. They effectively go into an isolation, so they're going to be in a hotel together. We're going to be testing, and effectively, it's not going to be a long quarantining, but effectively create the bubble before they get onto the ship. So by the time they get onto the ship, they've already been in a bubble, and hopefully at least a couple of days, I guess, if anything's going to blow up. But I guess you've got the whole vaccination stuff. So it's a long way of answering your question. Is people are pretty optimistic that it's going to start. I think people look a lot at that whole process, so what's the point of the CDC? Okay, so this is a good question to answer. So that's like a T. What is the point of the CDC test cruises? They don't require test cruises to ensure that fire safety is effective. So Julie, the test cruises were part of the sort of the 4-stage process, and it's really designed to check all of the new protocols, both through the embarkation process, on board, and disembarkation process. It was also to run some drills around if there was an outbreak on board, and also if it did include excursions, to look at how those excursions were going to be run. So it really was a way of testing the whole protocol. So now there's a bunch of things that the CDC are insisting on, and there's a bunch of things that the cruise lines proposed. So the CDC, for example, they've been pretty strict they've required testing on board capability and on land capability, and it's actually PCR testing was the type. So it's not what's been used in Europe. So that's testing that whole process of how they're going to embark people, how they're going to do the testing, how they're going to manage on board, so they can observe, test, and check everything in the protocol to verify and decide that they're happy. Based on those test cruises, they would then issue a license for sailing, which will become 60 days after. So it's really to test the COVID protocols. So of course, if they change their advice and views, then of course that could change it. So that's the real that's the real reason for those tests. So for example, in the CDC protocols, you have to be tested before you get on the ship at portside. Now, what's happened in some cases, so for example in Singapore, and also for some of the cruises in Europe that Mein Schiff were running, so the Royal Caribbean running, is you had to have a PCR test at specific locations 72 hours or 42 hours before you joined the ship. And there was some discussion around they were going to try and do that process, whereas the CDC said, no, it has to be done at the portside. So what MSC do is they do, the faster test it takes half an hour to get results before people board. So that was one thing the CDC said. The second thing the CDC had is everyone has to be tested before they get off the ship. So before people can disembark, there also has to be a testing process. Now, that's happening, for example, on MSC, they do multiple testing as well. So they do the testing before you get. Italy also required. They also use that as a way of keeping a check that people are don't have any cases coming up on board. Transatlantic repositioning. I think I might have touched on this, but I'm presuming transatlantic repositioning cruise in October, November 2020 will likely take place. Mary, they will take place, of course, if the ships move. A lot of the ships which normally would do the Mediterranean season are still across the Caribbean. So, of course, if they move, they're going to have to move back. So that's kind of one to watch. I think it will really settle around how many ships end up moving. But you're right. In terms of the current rules, even if assuming the CDC don't renew them, they would be able to run those transatlantics at the time period because the rule on the 7 nights will absolutely have dropped. Sam's asking, I'll touch on this. To be honest with you, I don't know the answer to this one specifically, but it is, you raised a couple of points in here that I would like to talk about. Is you've got a cruise on Viking scheduled for September, Amsterdam to Bucharest. So I'm guessing Amsterdam to Bucharest, that will be a river cruise. So I think that will be a river cruise you're doing. I've done a Bucharest. It might be. It must be because Bucharest is on the river. So anyway, what are the chances that exclusion restrictions will be lifted by the ship and the ports for vaccinated travelers? So let me talk about that. So as many of you probably know, is most of the protocols are requiring cruise lining excursions, certainly for ocean cruising. Now, when it comes to river cruising, that is not actually the case because a lot of those cruise lines like Viking, they bundle an excursion into the fare. However, on river cruising, you were not required, certainly last year, and the expectation for this year is you were not required to stick to the cruise liner excursion because, of course, if you were traveling as an independent traveler by land and you were going to Amsterdam or wherever, you could, of course, go out and explore by yourself. So that didn't apply. It only applied to the ocean cruising things, cruises. So that's certainly the case, and certainly the protocols as cruises open, that is included in the protocols. So, that is absolutely locked in. Now, what we don't know yet is for the UK, it seems unlikely that, well, it seems unlikely, but it may be a requirement that they have to keep that whole bubble going. That is, you keep the bubble going. So what will happen by September, we don't know. A lot of that is going to hinge on what the restrictions are with the lifting as vaccinations roll out. So my gut sense would be, for what it's worth, is by September, it feels like these restrictions are going to be, much less likely because, even in countries which have got relatively slow vaccinations processes within Europe, they're talking about having them done. I think France is saying by August they will have them done. And France is one of the sort of the slower ones in the scheme of things. So by then, Europe's going to be kind of way past that particular process. John raising the question, I think I might have touched on before, is will cruise lines ban passengers use an oxygen generator? Cunard has already done it. So for those of you who don't know, is Cunard have said people who need oxygen won't be able to come on their cruises. And the reason for that is because of the requirements they have for carrying extra oxygen. That's the reason they gave anyway. So they can't store kind of oxygen. But you're right, it's really interesting that Cunard is the only cruise line that's done that. I don't know why, and I haven't been able to find out why. So, so it's going to be interesting, definitely one to watch. But I would have thought when some of those protocols came out, and Cunard did it very early on, if other cruise lines were going to do it, you would have thought it would have come out around the same time. They definitely were, definitely were an outlier there. So, so let me just take a look on here and see how I've left over. What I do, by the way, is after the lecture, I do go back and look and see if there's any questions I haven't answered. And what I try and do is, if I haven't answered them, is try and answer them on these, or certainly try and build them into the update that I do on the Thursday. So let's have a look. Someone's got a question which I'll come back to Are there river cruises? No, Paul's asked a great question, actually. Good question. It might be a silly question, but are there river cruises in the UK, in Great Britain? No, not of the type that there are in Europe. There isn't like a river cruising thing. What you can do in the UK is you can do barge cruises. So you can either go on these narrow boats. They're not like bigger boats. They're narrow boats because the canals are much narrower. So you can go on those, and you can either go on one which is kind of hosted and run, or you can basically charter one yourself. They're very relatively easy to drive, but there's no river cruising, system as there were. I guess partly because the way the rivers are, they've got weirs or whatever they're called, so you can't actually go cruising off. But it's a good question, actually. You just can't do this. It's very much a European thing because the nature of the rivers. So that is a good question. Dennis asking about websites for finding low solar supplement. Is it better to work with a travel agent? Yes, definitely. Sign up to the newsletters, look for solar deals. Very few, so that's the best way of doing it. There is another way of doing it, which is if you look at vacations2go.com, they have a section for solo traveler deals where they do list those. So that's a good place to go and look. And Vacations2go normally has a pretty comprehensive list of all the cruises going. So that is one site to go and keep an eye out for those as well. If you are going high end, if you look at Silversea, for example, they have a little tab on their site which has solo traveler deals. Ponant as well. But if you're looking to spend a lot of money anyway. Samuel asking a question. Hi, I'm autistic and want to go on a cruise with my carer. I want to go somewhere that is hot and I want it to be cheap. I'm from the UK. I mean, that's everyone's dream, to go somewhere hot and somewhere that's not going to cost a lot of money. Now, the good news is, Samuel, is there are a lot of no-fly cruises out of the UK, which probably makes sense for you to do, so you never have the hassle of, flying and all that kind of stuff. So definitely, there's lots and lots of options. But now, you can go as far as the Caribbean and back, but that's going to take quite a long time, 2 or longer weeks. But there are a few that will do those. So you could go as far as the Caribbean. What the best thing to do would be, and again, it's going to be unpredictable for this summer, but there's a lot of no-fly cruises that are going off Southampton mostly, but you can, someone's got a Dover or even other ports around the UK will do this, which will head into the Mediterranean. And now they tend to be 2-week-long cruises because you're obviously going to get all the way through the Bay of Biscay, round through Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. But they are fantastic. So I've done a couple of those. They've been 2-week-long cruises, and that would be the look at a summer cruise. Now, you can do those relatively inexpensively. So if, for example, you looked at even a P&O, for example, particularly on some of their new big ships, you can have, assuming that they sell these. They'll have an inside cabin, they'll have an ocean view cabin, they'll have a balcony cabin, right up to big grand suites. So the price will range enormously from that. Now, I don't know whether my preference is always for a balcony, but that's going to cost much more. But certainly, you could look at inside cabin, look at an ocean view cabin. Ocean view cabin is great because, of course, you can get to look outside, get some daylight in. So you're going to get a vast range. You also get. Occasionally, I would take a look at some of the cruises like Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, MSC Cruises, because they also base ships out of the UK, and they're often doing to the Caribbean. So MSC Cruises, for example, you can often get some really, really good deals. The other thing to look at, I don't know if your carer is someone that you want to stay in the cabin with you, or whether that's someone that would be in a separate cabin, because you can also get obviously interconnecting cabins. It's a good thing to do. So get 2 cabins with an interconnecting door is a good thing to look at, and most of those cruise lines will have interconnecting doors. The other one to look at, but it's not inexpensive, but the other one to look at is Saga. But definitely, if you're looking for something expensive, you have to be over 50, but they are pretty expensive. So those are the ones I would look at. Particularly look at P&O, look at MSC, look at Royal Caribbean. So hopefully that answers your question, and let me know what you decide. It'd be great to know. One of the things that's always great is when people ask questions and had tips, just let me know what you actually end up doing, because even if you don't do what I suggested, then it's always good to know what people did. Esther's going, what? I'm not sure what I've done. It's very hard to read questions and try to answer them at the same time. Great. Oh, hard to read the questions and answer at the same time. Yeah, and They're not supposed to be very good at multitasking, are they? I seem to be, I seem to be not too bad. Okay, Tina's giving another suggestion here. I need to look at this one. I haven't seen that one. Another website with good sailing cruises, Passion for Cruises. Okay, I'll take a look at that. I'm not familiar with that. So that's another good question, another good site there, Passion for Cruises, if that's the case. Sunspot, can you recommend a specific travel agency for cruise bookings? Many thanks, Thomas, in CA, California. So I can give some recommendations. I mean, maybe drop me a message or something, or email me, Gary@tipsfortravelers.com. I can give you some suggestions of people that I know, that other people have worked with. Because it's US, I haven't booked with them specifically, but I know other people have worked with them. They follow the site a lot. So if you send me an email, Gary@tipsfortravelers.com, and I can send you those across. Again, because I haven't used them, I can't completely vouch for them, but certainly other people that have used them have been very happy with them. I can send you maybe two or three. Great tip here from Carol. Check with local handicapped association. They often have trips geared towards persons with disabilities. That's actually a really good point. Is the Autism Society, I don't know if that's what they're called, but have a look and see if they're also doing trips. That's a good point, actually, a really good tip, because there are some kind of experts around there. They may have some group cruises, or they may have some affiliations with travel agents. So that's a great tip. So really handy tip there. So wow, been loads of interesting questions. Hopefully you've found those interesting. As I said, I will try and check if there's any I haven't answered, try and answer them in the update video. If you haven't watched this week's update video, by the way, things just got interesting is what it's actually called. It's just been, it is a bit clickbait, I suppose, but the headline talk about what's happening with openings and the various questions. So thanks so much for joining the live stream. I really appreciate that so many people come. I love the great questions. It's also been fantastic, and I really appreciate that so many of you have also had a chance to throw in other tips and suggestions so we can all kind of learn from each other. So thanks so much for joining. Have a great rest of your weekend. Watch as many of my videos as you can, and then again, we'll see you here next week. Take care.